everyone. I'm Claudia DeFlees with the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. And today, in celebration of International Day of Persons with Disabilities, we will discuss the importance of equal and full inclusion in society for all people. International Day of Persons with Disabilities promotes the rights of persons with disabilities and increases awareness of every aspect of their lives. I have the great pleasure of speaking with Ben Mattlin today. Ben is a freelance writer and editor and essayist in Los Angeles. He is well known for his books, In Sickness and in Health, Love, Disability, and a Quest to Understand the Perils and Pleasures of Interabled Romance, as well as Miracle Boy Grows Up, How the Disability Rights Revolution Saved My Sanity. I first became acquainted with Ben from his New York Times Modern Love article, How 30 Blocks Became 30 Years, where he launches his readers into his love story with his wife, Mary Lois. His story expands the sphere of love and provides pivotal understanding of life with a disability. Alrighty, let's get started. Could you begin by telling us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to become a writer?
Well, I couldn't get any other job. That's actually partly true. I was born with my disability. It's a form of spinal muscular atrophy. So I never walked, I never stood. I was fortunate that my parents had the wherewithal, the emotional and financial resources to give me a pretty normal life. And, they told me I could do or be anything I wanted when I grew up, which wasn't quite true, but it was a good message, I think, for me. And then I went to college, and when I graduated, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Should I go to law school? Should I teach? What should I do? I'd always liked writing. My teacher said I was a good writer. I wrote for student newspapers. So I told myself, okay, I'll give you 5 years, learn something else. I interviewed at newspapers, magazines, book publishers. Nobody would hire me. This was before the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it was still legal to discriminate against people like me. So I couldn't get a job. But one editor saw some of my work for student newspapers and said, "Yeah, I like your style. How about I give you an assignment, just a one-off? You put it on the front page," and another one followed. And it took a long time to really kind of get this career going. But to this day, I've never been offered a regular job, but many, many writing assignments. And in between them, I wrote a couple of books. A third one is on the way.
We're excited to see it. So you touched on your writing, but how has your experience with disability-related stigma informed certain pieces of your writing? Because I know you write about many different topics, not solely disability.
Right. A lot of my journalism has nothing to do with disabilities. But when I write about my disability experiences, I get more out of it personally. It's very satisfying. I get kind of better reactions from people all around the world. I think early on it was just a sense that my sense of what it meant to have a disability, my impressions were not getting out there to the larger world. Now, this was years ago. There's a lot more out there now, but I just thought the disability story was not being articulated the way I felt it should be. So I started writing essays and ultimately books about the disability experience as I saw it. very different world now. There's a lot of stuff out there. I mean, the sort of visibility of disability is greatly increased, and yet that's still not enough. We have a long way to go.
Um, I was wondering, so you mentioned how you've gotten responses from all around the world, and just kind of, do you feel like your writing has been able to create a greater sense of community within the disabled
Has my
community?
writing? Yeah, maybe not. Uh, but the general sort of overall stuff out there about disabilities, I mean, social media helps promote it as well, and that has created a community. But the community was there, but maybe is more connected now than it used to be. I hope, I think. Um, but there are really a lot of different communities within the disability community, kind of subgroups and populations, partly by geography, but partly by just sort of interests and different agendas. It really is not, I was thinking about this recently, it's not really one movement anymore. There are multiple movements, plural, within the disability world. Um, and I'm sort of, I'm 58 years old now. There's a whole generation that's come of age since the ADA. They have a totally different perspective on these things than I do and my cohorts, my peers did. Um, I think we sort of thought when the ADA passed, that was it. I mean, that was the pinnacle. End of story. But we're in good shape now. And I've learned, in a way, it was really just the beginning. There's been so much going on in different parts of the community. Have been active in different ways. Maybe the ADA galvanized things and gave people a sense of entitlement and expectation. But there's so much more going on and so much more to accomplish.
So I know you just touched on the ADA. I was wondering, um, there is so much more to accomplish. I was wondering what your vision for that is in terms of making progress here in the United States and in the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the ADA uh, did amazing things. As I said, well, it didn't get me a job, but it got me on the bus. You know, almost any city bus now, I can get my wheelchair on, no problem, which amazes me because I remember when that was not the case. Um, but I still can't get on an airplane in my wheelchair because the airlines are not under the ADA, they're the Air Carrier Access Air Carrier Access Act, which is much less rigorous than the ADA standard for access. So I have to be, transferred out of my wheelchair into a airplane seat, and the chair is taken off. My wheelchair is taken off to baggage. It's often taken apart. Often comes back broken and in pieces. It's a real problem. And there is a movement to get that changed because it really is not justified. I mean, they talk about safety, but there are studies that show that it would be, as safe to park a wheelchair on an airplane as it is to, buckle your seatbelt on the plane. Um, there are still access barriers in other places. For instance, surprisingly, in healthcare, from a doctor's examination table that's not accessible. It's too high. Doesn't have grab bars. To especially nowadays with the pandemic, healthcare workers wearing masks that don't have transparent plates so that people who need to read lips can communicate with them. There's just countless problems. people not getting necessary scans and tests because they're disabled and they just don't get the equal treatment. More seriously, I've learned is the underreported, really big problem of police violence against disabled people and the mass incarceration of disabled people. Often it may be because they appear to be drunk when they're not, or non-compliant because the way their brains work, they don't process police instructions or can't even hear them. Uh, Massive problem, and incarcerating people when it's not really their fault just makes it worse. There's also been a sort of a second wave of disability rights activists who call themselves disability justice. The idea being, you can have rights without having justice. Uh, and specifically, they address the fact that there are people of color, LGBTQ people, other minorities within the disability community who face additional stigma and because of their intersectional identities are subject to all kinds of injustices that folks like me never knew. They have a community, they have a history that really has been ignored, largely not reported, and they're becoming increasingly organized and active to address their particular issues. I say they because I don't, I'm not, I'm an old white guy. I don't really, I can't pretend to represent them, but it's sort of the next wave of the disability movements, I think, that should be getting more attention. So, long story short, there's a lot of stuff going on and a lot of uh, goals there to achieve.
That was amazing. And bringing up all those different aspects of all these different communities, even I think, we are in a time of bringing everything to the surface and, everyone is being educated on it. I think it's an exciting time for
Mm-hmm.
all of this to come to. I was just wondering, we talked about your writing a little bit more at the beginning, and I was wondering if we could revisit. And I was just wondering what kind of impact you specifically hope for with your writing.
I'm sorry, impact from my writing?
Yeah, your goal, vision with your writing and your work.
I hope to get rich and famous, of course. Um, uh, in many ways, I think of myself as a writer first, maybe activist second or something. Uh, I like to communicate. As I said before, I've often felt maybe I can express things in ways that others don't or haven't yet. But I ask myself, am I writing for the disability community or for the non-disabled, audience to understand us better? I don't know. Maybe some of both. Maybe just people ought to, kind of get along with each other and understand each other better because the disability experience is a human experience. It's another aspect of life. And as they say, anybody can become disabled at any time from accident or illness or whatever. And most people probably will if they live long enough. The rate of disability is much higher among older people. Uh, and that's okay. I mean, that's how it's supposed to be. It's a normal, natural thing. and maybe to take away some of the stigma and the fear, to normalize it in a sense, but also appreciate what is unique about these experiences. Um, I suppose if literature has any purpose, I mean, beyond just entertainment, it's to help us understand ourselves and others better. So I guess it's kind of the grandiose scheme. That would be my hope would be to expand understanding. You could say empathy, I suppose, but not sympathy. Um, we don't want pity. We don't want uh, uh, condescension or patronization, patronizing, whatever. Uh, it's yeah, it's about equality. Maybe it's more than that. There's a pride, I think, I feel, in having this experience, this understanding, knowing what I've achieved, what others like me have achieved, and what we survive, the obstacles that we survive. And I think people, well, I suppose people can be inspired by that. I mean, not just that a disabled person does an ordinary thing and people get inspired by that. That's sort of not appropriate. But but the fact that we survive as a group despite all sorts of oppressions and stigma, yeah, I think that's a pretty compelling story.
It is, and I can attest to that with all of your work that you've done. Do you have any final thoughts for the audience today, Ben?
Well, you kind of asked me before what my hope or vision would be for the future, and I thought of a kind of a cute soundbite. A world where having a disability is not a handicap. Uh, in terms of being welcomed and really more than that, valued in society. I mean, that's really, I think, what the kind of big overarching goal is. To so that newly disabled people don't feel the stigma, don't feel quite so put out by it, and those of us who've had disability longer have an easier, well, a more fair experience of being valued in society, having access to all that there is, um, and gaining a level of, I don't know, respect, uh, so that we can you have a good life, can thrive without having to be like superheroes, just because we're human beings, and human beings, like any other human being, we deserve to be valued and respected and treated fairly, or something like that.
No, I completely agree, and I think a lot of your work and the rising work of rising activists is making for a much more equitable and hopefully, fair and equitable future for everyone. Alrighty, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ben. I
Thank
know
you for having me.
it was quick, but it was great. This is a great
Thank you.
conversation about disability rights. And thank you all for joining this Facebook Live. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. And if you want any more information on this topic and others related to democracy and human rights, please follow us on Facebook and Twitter at StateDRL. Thank you so much.